Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Omar Andino is huddled over a smartphone in a lush forest in Honduras' mountainous Yoro region.
Normalmente aquí el departamento de Yoro, mira, donde pone toda esta información.
He's confirming details about the boundaries of the small plot where he grows coffee beans.
Certificación en este caso, pues usted no tiene. No.
It's something Andino has never done before, mapping his farm. This exercise won't help Andino's harvest, but it's become a crucial part of his work because of regulations that were passed thousands of miles away.
We have to reduce the EU's consumption footprint on land and forest around the world.
That's President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in 2021, pledging to introduce new rules to protect global forests.
European voters and consumers no longer want to buy products that are responsible for deforestation or forest degradation.
The rule she's talking about ended up being called the European Union Deforestation Regulation. It tackles deforestation risks in the supply chain and goes into effect later this year. Bear with me, I know there are few things that can make a brain shut down faster than the words new EU regulations. But these new rules are keeping people all over the world up at night.
You know, we're talking about anxiety, fear, panic, hope that maybe something will be postponed, something will be tweaked.
Bloomberg's Agnieszka de Sousa says that's because these rules have reach. They reach into the mountains of Honduras and the forests of Indonesia. They reach into your coffee cup, your lipstick tube, and even the tires on your car.
It's a hotly discussed topic. It's something that many traders, producers, food producers are really, really worrying about and are watching. And yet, you know, it's something that I think most of the people are not even aware of.
Today on the show, how a little-known piece of regulation intended to save the world's forests could have huge, unintended consequences for billions of dollars in trade. This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm Sarah Holder.
I'm Agnieszka de Sousa, senior food and agriculture reporter based in London, and I'm also Bloomberg's global food czar.
That is a fabulous title. That's the best title I've heard at Bloomberg so far.
It's a great job.
Agnieszka has been looking into this new law, known as the EUDR, since it was passed last year.
I think this is a fascinating example of a green policy and how its rollout works in practice. What are the shortcomings? What are the challenges? What are the economic trade-offs?
The regulation started off with one simple goal: to make sure the EU is doing its best to stop deforestation. In just the last 30 years, the world lost woodlands equivalent to an area larger than the European Union itself. A lot of that forest was cleared to make way for farms or cattle grazing land.
Essentially, the key purpose of this legislation is to help reverse or halt deforestation around the world. It is a big issue, one of the greatest environmental challenges the world faces, and it's still pretty behind where it should be in terms of tackling it.
The EUDR mandates that all of the companies and countries that sell products to the EU must prove those products did not come from land that was deforested after 2020, whether legally or illegally. The new regulations target some of the products that have historically been some of the worst offenders.
Those 7 commodities are soy, cattle, palm oil, rubber, wood, coffee, and cocoa, and any related products. So chocolate, furniture, tires. It's a pretty long list. It could be books, newspapers, plywood.
Pretty much anything you might touch on a given day.
That's right.
To prove these products don't come from recently deforested land, companies, producers, and farmers have to submit paperwork that traces every raw material back to where it came from.
So that goes all the way to farm. They need to, prepare the geofencing of farms, for example. So they have to show where exactly every cocoa bean or carcass of beef came from. It has to be fully traced.
Doing that meticulous tracing can involve everything from visits from field agents, like we heard earlier, to reports from neighbors, to mapping previously unmapped land. The responsibility for getting this proof mostly rests with the companies themselves.
And that includes pretty much like all the household names. Think about food giants like Nestle, Unilever, chocolate makers, cosmetics producers that need palm oil for their lipsticks. It is a pretty wide range of companies.
The law also touches smaller companies, which will have a bit longer to comply with the regulations. All told, more than 55 countries will be affected, along with millions of farmers and producers all across the globe.
We've calculated that the EUDR will tackle at least $110 billion in trade.
And can you talk more about why this was such a priority for the EU?
Deforestation is a major source of global greenhouse gas emissions, of biodiversity loss. It is a very, very big problem. The European Union is one of the biggest marketplaces in the world, and it does import huge amounts of those commodities. It is a huge consumer of coffee. And for many years, the European Union faced criticism that very much its demand and its appetite for those goods fueled deforestation elsewhere.
And what happens if companies don't comply with these new regulations that are meant to curb deforestation?
If they don't comply, they cannot ship those goods to the EU. If they are found in breach of the regulations, they face hefty fines, and that could include being banned or suspended from doing business there, to being suspended from public procurement, their cargo being confiscated.
So not complying means fines, loss of business, and pain for companies. But complying could mean layers of regulation, red tape, and lots of paperwork. This is hard on farmers and businesses, but consumers will see the effect of these rules as well. That is, buyers of all that coffee, chocolate, lipstick, books, and car tires. Companies have argued that, whatever way you slice it, the EUDR will increase the cost of production, slow down supply chains, and possibly lead to shortages, something neither companies nor consumers want right now.
The cocoa market right now, there's not enough cocoa. There's a cocoa shortage, which naturally means higher prices. Traders have warned that sustainability does cost, and European consumers will bear that cost eventually.
But chocolate prices aren't the only thing at stake here. Coming up after the break, what these new rules could do to hundreds of thousands of farmers who desperately rely on these crops to survive. Mapping the world is no easy task. Mapping one farm on a shoestring budget in a remote area is particularly tricky. Bloomberg global food czar Agnieszka de Sousa says that's why these new European Union rules could be very difficult for smaller farmers. That is, if they even know they exist.
Many farmers are not even aware of this regulation, and the people who have been really leading the efforts that we see are cooperatives. So there are many members within those farmer cooperatives that go out there, help farmers, try to do all the mapping. They're in touch with the buyers. And also we've seen big companies doing a lot of those efforts as well.
There are smartphone apps and other tools to help farmers submit land titles, boundaries, and coordinates of their farms. But many of the farmers in the most remote locations don't even have cell phone service.
It's something that requires training, and very often farmers may not have that training. So this is where companies, cooperatives, and even governments can come in and lead those efforts.
Some businesses have spotted an opportunity here, like the Dutch company Meridia. It's seen its business double since the EUDR was announced in 2021. It's won contracts from companies like Unilever and Cargill, who are scrambling to source all of the materials in all of the thousands of products they sell to the EU.
They're a mapping company, but primarily they're a data verification company. They call themselves data doctors. And their job is to get the lists of farms from their clients and verify them and make sure that they're actually solid, that they make sense, that there are no flaws. Because at the end of the day, it actually mapping a farm is an effort, and it does take work, and you cannot be sloppy.
Meridia and other data companies like it send teams of people from farm to help trace their boundaries.
They have people on the ground. They start early. They go to a village. They find out where are the farmers, what they grow. Could they take them to the land? They will hold a long GPS stick that will receive the satellite signal. They will have the tablet. They will ask a lot of questions to a farmer. And then the farmers will take them around the land and show them where exactly the farm boundaries are. Now, you also have to verify it with the neighbors, right? You have to ask the neighbors, are these boundaries actually correct? Or is it just he's trying to get his farm bigger than it actually is? So there's a lot of questions that people on the ground really need to ask.
For some countries, figuring out how to answer all these questions, how to identify the origins of every coffee bean and every rubber tree by the end of the year is causing a lot of concern.
One of the examples we are citing is Honduras. It's a small country. It doesn't have that many farmers. You could argue, okay, it doesn't really matter, on the grand scheme of things. But for Honduras, it's a big deal. As my colleagues calculated, the exposure of Honduran economy to the EUDR is something like 3.5% of the GDP.
Many of the countries that have a high number of smaller farmers have come together to lobby the EU to lighten up a little, or at least to give them extra time or guidance in complying with the new rules.
Commodities have complex supply chains. There's a lot of questions how things will get done, who's going to police it, who's going to handle the cargo when it arrives at the port, what does that mean? And that is a source of a lot of anxiety for a lot of companies, for a lot of countries, because they still do not understand all the details of it. And so they have been asking for delays. Recently we even had the agriculture minister in Australia asking for a delay until the requirements of the EUDR are well understood. And this is one thing that where industry or countries, I could say, are pretty united as to their concerns, whether they have enough time to adjust to the new law.
Some countries are going even further and looking for other places to sell their goods outside of the EU, which could undermine efforts to stop deforestation. For example, Ethiopia's coffee farmers have started exploring markets in Saudi Arabia, China, and Russia.
Nobody we've spoken to denies that deforestation is a problem and it needs to be tackled. But I think one key issue that those countries and companies have is the implementation of the regulations. So in a way, the devil is in the implementation of it.
Agnieszka says one country has even accused the EU of regulatory imperialism.
Indonesia, just like several other countries, wrote a letter to the EU expressing concern. It's in this industry minister branded it a form of regulatory imperialism. The EU imposing their way of thinking, their requirements, their regulations onto the rest of the world. It's a pretty sensitive topic.
Still, environmental advocates argue curbing deforestation just can't wait. European regulators are trying to balance the sense of urgency against the economic concerns of farmers and small businesses. To start, they've set aside a fund of $76 million to help support small producers in complying with regulations. But ultimately, the law is the law. EU member states voted on it, and now everyone just has to figure out how to make it work best.
Rolling out green policies does require trade-off. It is challenging. It does require thought. There could be unintended consequences stemming from it, but it's something that countries are going through and could learn from their mistakes.
Agnieszka says that her role as global food czar means she's seen a lot of these regulations over the years to make supply chains greener or more transparent. And she's come away with one big lesson.
It's something that it is a big challenge, but it's not a reason not to do it. It's just a question of how it gets done and how regulators can improve going forward.
For Omar Andino, the farmer from Honduras who already struggles to get by selling coffee, the new rule came as a surprise, as it did to so many. But with the help of his local farming collective and a supply chain mapping company, he's finally adding his plot to the map. Little by little, regulators hope that a new picture will start to emerge, tree by tree, farm by farm, of where the world's goods really come from. This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm Sarah Holder. This episode was produced by Jessica Beck and Adriana Tapia. It was edited by Stacey Vanek Smith and Rodney Jefferson. It was mixed by Blake Maples. It was fact-checked by Thomas Liu. Our senior producers are Kim Gittleson and Naomi Shavin. Our senior editor is Elizabeth Ponso. Nicole Beamsterboer is our executive producer. Sage Bauman is our head of podcasts. Thanks for listening. Please follow and review The Big Take wherever you get your podcasts. It helps new listeners find the show. We'll be back on Monday.